Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, both here and online, and also to all those people who contributed to the People's Review of Prevent. And also just one brief mention to Stoke White law firm who are hosting us today. I first encountered Prevent 7 years ago when I received Prevent training as a teacher just down the road from here. The Prevent training and the Prevent strategy more generally proposes that we can identify the perpetrators of imagined future acts of terrorism, a proposition so harmful and absurd that before Prevent was introduced, it was confined to the pages of dystopian science fiction novels. Prevent was, however, conceived in 2004, with the Prevent training that I received and that NHS workers have since received, written in 2007. But it took the Trojan Horse hoax in 2014 in Birmingham, where a fake letter led to a witch hunt against Muslims in Birmingham and resulted in Ofsted, the schools inspectorate, forcing Prevent into schools across the country. When I was forced to adopt Prevent, I saw the harm that it did between teacher and pupil relationships by casting me as an informant on my students. This breach of trust destroyed effective community education. That is education that served the needs and the interests of the children and families who we work for. Prevent has since been forced into universities and onto NHS workers, which includes millions of people being trained in how to spot the supposed menace of extremism. Your GP and mental health teams are having to put their duty to act as informants to the police above their patients' interests. And it cannot be overstated how damaging to patient care this is. Not surprisingly, Prevent has faced widespread opposition from civil society groups, lawyers, unions, and academic researchers. Yet the government have failed to review it. When pressed to review Prevent in recent years, the government appointed Lord Carlisle, who had written the introduction to the Prevent strategy, and is on the record in the House of Lords as saying that he is somewhat biased towards Prevent. Perhaps not surprisingly, Lord Carlisle stood down as the chair of the Prevent review rather than face a judicial review over his independence. He's since been replaced by Sir William Shawcross. Sir William Shawcross, who is a supporter of the worst excesses of the war on terror. Shawcross, who has proposed that Europe and Islam are incompatible. He has also promoted right-wing conspiracies about growing Islamic populations in Europe. And he was accused of unfairly targeting Muslim charities while chair of the Charity Commission. Prevent is the domestic branch of the global war on terror, a war that predominantly harms Muslims at home and abroad. The idea that Shawcross is an appropriate person to chair such a review is laughable. So it's no surprise that hundreds of organisations and individuals boycotted the Shawcross review of Prevent that the government had convened. It's in this context that Professor John Holmwood and Layla Aitlhadj have spent the last 6 months examining the academic literature and submissions to the People's Review. They've reviewed over 600 cases of those impacted by Prevent, whilst guided by a panel of independent experts. They conclude that Prevent is Islamophobic, discriminatory, and undermines fundamental freedoms of particularly Muslims and children. The People's Review of Prevent calls on the government to withdraw its Prevent strategy on the grounds that it is ineffective, disproportionate, and discriminatory. And they call on practitioners caught up in Prevent, community groups, trades unions, and professional associations, and civil society groups to demand that Prevent be withdrawn. John and Layla, I'm incredibly grateful to you for writing this report and putting the review together. And I endorse it without hesitation. So thank you very much. We're now going to pass over to give Layla and John a chance to speak. So first, Layla, who is the director of Prevent Watch and the co-chair of the People's Review of Prevent, is going to describe the rationale, methodology, and structure of the report. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob, for going through why the People's Review of Prevent is needed. And I'm just going to explain briefly how we came about to produce the report that we have today. So initially, when we sat down, we were very cognizant of the fact that there is plenty of research already out there on Prevent. There's been over a decade of legitimate concerns and criticisms that have been raised, and this has been backed up by evidence that you can find published in various research reports by academics, by NGOs, by researchers and individuals who have come forward to journalists and who have told their story. So we were aware that there was a lot out there, and we were also aware that we were not going to be able to cover every single dimension of PREVENT. And so one of the first things that we did was we assembled an expert panel of advisors just to help shape which topics we should be looking at in terms of what is priority at the moment, and what is going to be coming out with regards to the evolution of PREVENT, or how we see PREVENT playing out in the future. We came up with approximately 7 topics that we then held roundtable discussions on. So we invited experts from each of the fields. So these topics included everything from safeguarding to data processing and AI, Islamophobia, right-wing extremism, and political activism. So from these 7 topics, we held roundtables, we invited the experts to talk. And again, the experts ranged from the lawyers who were in the cases and representing the clients who fought for their data to be removed from the police databases, all the way to practitioners who have seen on a social care side of things how PREVENT and ideas of radicalization have become increasingly part of day-to-day social care. Following these roundtables, we then were quite happy and glad to have several researchers on our team. Again, the researchers are broad, from lawyers to activists, who helped us to collate all the information on those various topics. And we used, crucially, because it's the People's Review of PREVENT, the people's voices. So the people's voices were cases that came both from the PREVENT Watch database of nearly 600 individuals who we have documented cases of in terms of their interaction with PREVENT, as well as the cases from within many of those research reports have cases of their own, whether it was direct impact of PREVENT or indirectly impacted by PREVENT. We also use those cases towards our case-based evidence. So if you look actually at Appendix 2 of the People's Review of PREVENT, you'll see a list of research reports that we use to inform the People's Review of PREVENT report. And if you look at Appendix 1, then you'll see a breakdown of case summaries in terms of the types of evidence that we were using from first-hand experience. Once we had collated all of this, again, we had a lot more information than we had hoped, given that we'd only focused on specific topics. So we then placed into 3 parts all of this information. And what we had was the first part, which is pathologizing religion and political activism. The second part of the report looks at how not only individuals, but entire communities have been securitized. And then the third part of the report looks at how fundamental rights are being prevented through the enactment of PREVENT. So from there, I think I'll hand over to John, Professor John Holmwood, who is my co-chair, and he will discuss some of the findings of the report.
Okay, thank you very much. And I hope people who read the report will find it both moderate and measured, but our findings are unequivocal. What we show is that PREVENT operates at a very considerable distance from any terrorist activity, and it is directed at individuals who have committed no offence at all. While advocates for PREVENT can provide no evidence that it diminishes the risk of terrorism, we show that what it does is increase anxiety and places British Muslims in particular under unwarranted suspicion. We show that PREVENT is discriminatory in its impact on Muslim communities. For example, as part of the review process, we managed to discover a number of PREVENT priority areas. For the first time, we got information about all the PREVENT priority areas in England. And on that basis, we can show that 1/3 of the population of England and Wales live in a PREVENT priority area, compared with 3/4 of Muslims. This is why PREVENT referrals are also disproportionately of Muslims. But equally seriously, PREVENT is directed primarily at children and young people, who make up around half of all referrals. And this includes children at nursery and primary schools. Indeed, the requirement in England and Wales is now for schools to teach fundamental British values as part of the PREVENT duty. And what that means is that a national curriculum has been brought in by the back door. The curriculum comes under Section 78 of the Education Act. This is a very specific part of the Education Act which requires schools to provide, and I quote, for the spiritual, moral, cultural, mental, and physical development of children. In effect, child development is now subordinated to a national security imperative. We also show how PREVENT operates to curtail political expression and religious freedoms, not just amongst young people, but more widely. And these are freedoms which are otherwise described as central to the British values that PREVENT claims to promote. Now, PREVENT is described as safeguarding children from harms. However, under PREVENT, safeguarding is focused on protecting the wider public from children and young people believed to be risky, rather than protecting children themselves from harms. And one really important part of our report, I think, which distinguishes it from other commentaries on PREVENT, is that throughout it, we present case studies that show how real the harms produced by PREVENT can be and the distress that they cause to children, their families, and their carers. Now, the government argues that terrorists operate with disregard for human rights and that the language of rights should be used against them. But in fact, it neglects its own breaches of human rights. In fact, it dismisses such criticisms, and the watchdog designed to protect human rights, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, has failed to respond to the concerns, not just concerns raised by critics of PREVENT domestically, but also by UN special rapporteurs. And we are incredibly pleased that the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights has endorsed our report. As Rob said, there's a massive incorporation of everyday public employees and practitioners into the security functions of the state. In 2019, the Home Office estimated that over 1 million individuals had been trained in PREVENT. And since 2019, that has expanded considerably. So what we believe our report has shown is that PREVENT is divisive, that it serves partisan electoral ends rather than providing greater security for citizens. In this way, it's implicated, and all of us become implicated in divisive and discriminatory nature of the policy. We anticipate that William Shawcross will call for an extension of PREVENT into new sectors, and that he will call for a reinforcement of its central coordination by security services. One thing that has gone unnoticed is that in a mimicking of the USA and of certain kinds of television programs, the Home Office now has a Department for Homeland Security since April of this year. And the Department of Homeland Security is responsible for PREVENT. Instead of an extension of PREVENT, we propose that the evidence shows that PREVENT should be withdrawn at the earliest possible opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, John. We're now going to pass over to, we're very grateful to Conor Gearty, who is a professor of law at LSE, who's going to talk to us now briefly before we'll take some questions from those in attendance. So over to you, Conor.
Right, I think the most important word in that introduction was briefly. So I would be short. I am, this is a hackneyed word. I am honored to have been asked to do the foreword. I am honored. Now, the report is, I've seen it, obviously. I've read it. It's outstanding. It's outstanding. It is attribute to Layla and John's tenacity, intellectual rigor, and also, I don't use this word ill-advisedly, courage. The trade of our society is towards the bullying into silence of people who challenge the contradictions inherent in this country's approach to the resolution of what its own values entail. And there is a ridiculous level of stupidity about the way in which British values are being policed and used to justify the destruction of British values without any sense of irony. And this report exposes that. It also takes the initiative, which is a fabulous thing. For too often, people who are resisting change are just that, change for the worst, on the back foot, reactive. I think it's a great thing that this report has come out in advance of what we've been hearing about the Shawcross thing. Because we are not here today just reacting to the latest extension of Prevent, which will be flagged up in some massive headline in the Telegraph, which will be used to try and dragoon the Labour Party into a position which is defensive in the culture wars. We are not doing that. We are actually setting out our own stall, and we are trying to inform the agenda. Now, I have my own views on Prevent. I will just say two things and then stop, because I think we're going to have a question and answer opportunity. The first is it a coincidence that the two forwards are by myself and Fionnuala Ní Aoláin? Fionnuala Ní Aoláin is a magnificent scholar and is an independent figure in this field at United Nations level. We are both Irish. It is within our memory what it is like to be subjected to the sorts of things that are a commonplace for many people here. And when it was happening to us, we had the United States on our side, and we had the Republic of Ireland on our side, and we had many, many established figures in British culture who represented a kind of Irishness to the community that would render us all suspect communities. We were, in other words, more secure. But we have a kind of residual cultural understanding of it. And I want to salute especially to the authors of this report for having, as it were, stood in solidarity with the people who are victims of Prevent. And the second thing I wanted to say is that Prevent has been expanding since its inception, and it needs to be tamed. It was initially developed by well-meaning, thoughtful, and intelligent civil servants as a way of engaging with violence, as a way of preventing political violence, hence Prevent. But under the Conservative and Liberal coalition, it expanded. It expanded to prevent what it called extremism, which had no link with violence. And that's the door into which the invigilators of our behavior have marched, what Rob mentioned right at the start. And that's where it takes a dramatic wrong turning. And I have no doubt that Mr. Shawcross will suggest further expansion. So well done to the report authors and all those who were engaged in the construction of it. As I say, I am proud to be part of this project. I'll stop there.